The rain that October came thin and grey, the kind that did not fall so much as hang in the air over Fenwick, soaking through wool before a body noticed it was wet. Wood smoke lay low along the lane. Under it ran the smell of wet stone, and under that, fainter, the smell of old paper and leather that had followed Judith Hale out of her own front door and into the street, because the door had stood open all morning while the handcart was loaded. She was the kind of woman a market did not remember seeing. Not old, not young enough to be looked at twice. A grey shawl, a grey dress gone soft at the seams from washing, hands reddened at the knuckle from cold water and small mending work. She had been a schoolmaster's wife for 6 years, and a widow for 1, and in that year she had learned exactly how far a coin could be made to stretch, and exactly where it broke. Today it had broken for the last time. The books on the cart were Thomas's, every one of them, and by evening they would not be hers any more. She did not weep over the cart. She had done her weeping in the spring, when the fever took him, quietly and in a locked room, and had not let anyone see it since. That was a rule she had made for herself, and she kept it the way she kept everything, without complaint and without exception. The cart held 40 books, more or less, boxed in twine and old newspaper, sermons, Latin grammars, a worn Ovid with Thomas's small, neat hand crowding the margins. A single slim volume of poems he had given her before either of them had any money at all, which she had set apart from the rest and told herself, twice already that morning, that she would not sell. Before the day was done, she was going to have nothing left in the house that a stranger could not carry away in one trip. She knew that, the way she knew rain was coming before it fell. It did not frighten her any more. Fear, like grief, was a thing she had put where it would not show. She pushed the cart the 1/4 mile to the square herself, past the baker's, past the smithy, past the churchyard where Thomas lay under a stone she had not yet been able to afford words for. A boy of perhaps 6 trailed the baker's window the whole way, thin under a coat too big for him, watching the loaves the way a dog watches a table it has been beaten away from before. She marked him and went on. There would be time to think of the boy later. There was never time to think of anything else first. At the corner of the square, a man was already waiting near the empty stall she had arranged to use, though the arrangement had only been made the evening before, with a note left at the inn. He stood very still for a man doing nothing. He was not old, not much past 30, with a face that had never been called handsome, and did not appear to have suffered for it, hard at the jaw, quiet in the eyes, which were the colour of strong tea, and did not move quickly over anything. He wore good wool cut plain, no crest, no signet showing, a working coat, though his boots were too fine for it, if a person troubled to look, which Judith did not. He gave his name as Corbett, nothing more. He said he had heard, from a correspondent in the county, that a schoolmaster's library was to be sold, and that he dealt privately in old books for a collector who did not care to be known. It was not strictly a lie. It simply was not the whole of the truth, and he had long since made his peace with the difference, the way a man makes peace with a coat that does not quite fit, but keeps out the weather all the same. He asked to see the books before any others arrived to bid on them. She undid the twine with hands that did not shake, though the morning was cold enough to excuse it if they had. She named no price first.
She let him look. He turned each volume over with a care she noticed and did not remark on, checking the spine, the foxing, the hand in the margins, and twice he stopped on a page and read it through before he set the book down, as though the words themselves mattered to him, and not only what they might fetch. "Your husband taught," he said, not quite a question. "Latin and letters, to boys who could pay and some who could not." She did not look up from the twine she was coiling. He did not care much which. "That shows," Corbett said, and did not explain what he meant, and she did not ask, because a woman selling her dead husband's library did not have the leisure to ask a stranger to explain himself. He was still turning over the Ovid, slow, unhurried, a man with nowhere else he needed to be, when the shouting started 3 stalls down. The baker had the boy by the collar. It was the same thin boy who had trailed the window on her way in, and he had a half loaf clutched against his ribs, like a thing he meant to die holding, rather than give back. And the baker was shouting the word thief, loud enough to turn every head in the square, loud enough that a constable's man had already begun making his slow, satisfied way over from the churchyard gate. Judith did not decide to move. She simply found herself moving, the way water finds the low ground without being told to. She did not know then that the man called Corbett had gone very still beside her cart, and that he was watching her rather than the boy, and that he had gone still in exactly that particular way because a woman he had known once, years before, in a warmer room than this one, would have turned her face aside from a scene like this and called it none of her affair, and had, more than once, and had done it prettily. She did not know that he had come to Fenwick already half suspecting he would find nothing worth the journey, another widow's library, another fair price paid and forgotten. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew there was a hungry child being shaken by the collar in the middle of a market square, and that the coin in her apron pocket, the whole of what Corbett had just paid her, the whole of what stood between her and another day with nothing in the pot, was the only thing in the world close enough to hand to fix it. She put the coin down on the baker's board without a word, and lifted the boy's chin with 2 fingers, gently, the way she might have lifted a book she was afraid of damaging. "He is with me," she said. "I sent him ahead." The baker did not believe her. It did not matter whether he believed her. The coin was on the board, and it was more than the loaf was worth, and the constable's man, seeing money change hands, lost interest and turned back toward the churchyard, because a settled debt was not his business. She did not scold the boy. She crouched instead, so that her eyes were level with his, and asked his name, and he told her, in a voice gone thin with fright, that it was Tam, and that his mother could not get up from her bed, and that there had been nothing in the house since Tuesday. She gave him the loaf. She had already paid for it, and there was no sense pretending otherwise. She walked with him 3 streets over to see where he lived, because a woman who has buried one person to a fever does not send a hungry child home to a sick mother without first learning how bad the sickness is. And what she found in that room, a woman named Peg, lying gray and short of breath under a single blanket, decided something in her that she did not examine closely at the time. She had nothing left to give them. She said so, plainly, and was ashamed of nothing in the saying of it, and left. She did not know then that the man who called himself Corbett had followed at a distance the whole way, unseen, and had stood a long while outside that door after she had gone, looking at it the way a man looks at a thing he has decided to remember. She did not know that his name was not Corbett, not entirely, that the surname was true enough, but the rest of it, the part that would have made every stall in that square go quiet and every hat come off, was Rennick, and that he was the 7th Duke of it, and had been for 3 years, and had not yet found a single soul who treated him as anything other than what he was worth on paper. She walked back to her empty cart and began coiling the twine again, because the books were sold, and there was nothing more to do there. And she did not think of the man called Corbett again until she found him still standing exactly where she had left him, the Ovid still in his hand, watching her come back across the square with an expression she could not read, and did not try very hard to. "I will take all of them," he said, "the whole library. I will not haggle over it." She told him that was more than fair. "It is not," he said. "It is what they are worth to a man who read every page while you were gone." She did not thank him the way he seemed to expect. She only nodded once, and began loading the boxes back onto the cart for him to carry away, and did not know then that this was the first of many things he would do for her, without once telling her his name. He came back to the yard behind her cottage 6 days later, with the boxes still unopened in his gig, which she thought odd for a man who bought books to sell them, and did not say so. "I find I have not the shelving for them yet," he said, which was true in the way that most of what he told her was true, if a person did not ask which house he meant. "My employer would want them catalogued first, the condition noted, the marginalia copied out, where it is legible. He pays for the labor." She said she could do that work. She had done it for Thomas half her married life, keeping his library in order, and her hand was clear, and she did not need to be told twice how a title page was meant to be transcribed. He paid her for it before she had done a page of it, which she refused, and he told her, without heat, that he did not haggle, and that this appeared to be a fact about him she would simply have to accustom herself to. And there was something so dry in the way he said it that she nearly smiled, and did not, because she had not smiled since the spring, and was not entirely sure she remembered how the muscles of it went. He came 3 afternoons that week, and 4 the next, and sat across her small table while she worked, and did not fill the silence unless he had something worth putting into it. She noticed that about him before she noticed anything else. Most men she had known filled silence the way water fills a cracked jug, constantly, out of habit, whether there was anything to say or not. He let a silence sit until it had earned its keep. "Your husband wrote a great deal in these margins," he said one afternoon, turning the Ovid over. "Arguing with the poet, mostly." He argued with everyone, politely. She did not look up from the ledger she was ruling. He would have argued with you inside an hour. "I would have enjoyed that more than most conversations I have had this year." She asked, because it seemed a fair question, and she had never learned to swallow a fair question for the sake of manners, whether his year had been so poor a one for conversation. He was quiet long enough that she thought he would not answer at all. "I was engaged to be married," he said finally. "Some years passed. She was very beautiful and said all the correct things in company. I once saw her strike a maid across the face for spilling wine on a hem, and smile at me not a minute later, as though nothing at all had happened in the room. I broke it off. I have found, since, that I trust very little what a person says when they believe the only witness in the room is beneath their notice." She did not offer him sympathy. She had the sense, correctly, that he would not have wanted it. "That is a hard thing to carry into every room after," she said instead. "It is." He set the book down.
"I have found it useful, all the same." He asked, before he left that day, whether the boy Tam and his mother had food enough, in a voice so carefully idle that she nearly missed the care in it. And she said she did not know. She had not been back. She had nothing further to spare them. And something crossed his face that she took for simple courtesy, and was not. 2 mornings later, a sack of coal and a basket of bread appeared at Peg's door, with no name on the note attached, only the words, "For the boy," and Peg told Judith of it with tears standing plain in her eyes. And Judith said she did not know who could have sent it, and that was the truth, though she thought of Corbett once, briefly, and set the thought aside as too strange to be believed. She did not know then that this was the first stone in a wall he was building, without once putting his name to a brick of it. The frost came hard the week Lady Corvina Wexley arrived at Fenwick to visit the Duke of Renwick, whom she called cousin, though the blood between them was thinner than that word suggested, and whom she had decided, with the calm certainty of a woman used to getting what she planned for, that she would marry before the year turned. She heard, from a maid who heard it from a groom, that the Duke had taken a curious interest in a schoolmaster's widow 3 streets from the square, that he called on her under a false name, and sat at her table like a tradesman, and she came to see for herself, dressed for it, in a carriage too fine for Fenwick's narrow lanes. She found Judith at her own door, with ink on 2 fingers and her sleeves pinned back for work, and looked her over the way a woman looks over a horse she has already decided not to buy. "You must be the widow," Lady Corvina said. "I had heard you kept a very small house. I had not pictured it quite so small as this." Judith said that it was the house she had, and it kept the rain off, which was more than some larger ones managed. Lady Corvina laughed, a small, practised sound, 3 neat beats of it, like a bell being rung by someone who had rung it many times before, and found it always did its work. "How very plain you are. I am told you sell dead men's books for bread. It is almost charming in its way, like a dog that has learned to beg prettily." "I have never begged," Judith said. "I have sold what was mine to sell. There is a difference, though I understand it may be hard to see from a carriage." For a long moment neither of them said anything at all. A rook called once from the wall behind the cottage, and did not call again. "You ought to know," Lady Corvina said, softer now, which was somehow worse than the laugh had been, "that men of rank amuse themselves with women like you, and marry women like me. It costs him nothing to sit at your table. It would cost him everything to keep you at his. I tell you this as a kindness, so that you are not made a greater fool of than you already have been." "Thank you," Judith said, and meant it, in the plain sense of the word, because it cost her nothing to be civil, and she had decided long ago that dignity was cheaper kept than lost. "I will remember it was meant kindly." She did not cry when the carriage pulled away. She went back inside and sat at her table, and looked at her own ink-stained fingers for a long while. And it was there that Corbett found her an hour later, and she did not tell him what had passed, out of a pride that had nothing left in it to spare, though he read enough of it in her face that he asked no further questions, and simply sat with her until the light went, saying very little, which she found, to her own surprise, was exactly the right amount. He came less often after that, for reasons she did not understand, and told herself firmly she did not need to understand, and she took his absence for confirmation of everything Lady Corvina had said, because a woman conditioned to expect little finds it easy to believe little is coming.
It was a groom, not Lady Corvina, who undid her at last. A boy sent with a message about the coal, who touched his cap to her and said, without thinking, that his Grace had asked after the widow's health, and then went white, and stammered that he had misspoken, and would she be so kind as to forget he had said it. She did not forget it. She turned it over that whole night, the way she had once turned over Thomas's Latin, looking for the sense underneath the words, and by morning she had found it, and it made a fool of her in exactly the shape Lady Corvina had promised it would.
Mr. Corbett, who bought books for an employer who did not care to be known. Mr. Corbett, who paid without haggling and asked after a boy he had never met, and sat in her small house because it amused him, apparently, to see how a poor woman managed, before he went home to whatever house was actually his. She wrote him a short letter that evening. She did not weep while she wrote it, though her hand was not as steady as she would have liked, and she noted that, and did not let it slow her. "Sir," she wrote, because she did not know what else to call him, and would not now flatter him with his own true name. "I believe our arrangement has run its natural course. The cataloguing is nearly finished, and I can complete the remainder alone. I thank you for your custom. I will trouble you no further, and I would ask the same courtesy in return." She did not sign it with any warmth. She sent it by the same boy who had brought the coal, and told herself, plainly, that she had done the only sensible thing available to a woman with nothing left to lose but her own good opinion of herself, and that this, at least, she meant to keep. The letter reached him at Renwick Hall on a Tuesday, and he read it twice, and did not answer it, because he did not yet know what had prompted it, and a man who does not know the wound cannot dress it honestly. It was Mrs. Pruitt, his housekeeper of 11 years, who told him, 3 days later, that Peg's fever had worsened again, and that the boy Tam had been seen crying at the churchyard gate, of all useless places for a child to cry, and that someone ought to see to it, and the Duke of Renwick, who had spent 3 days pretending to himself that Fenwick was simply a matter he had set aside, was in his gig within the hour. Mrs. Pruitt had known Judith Hale for exactly one conversation, held at Peg's bedside a fortnight before, when she had gone herself, on the Duke's quiet instruction, to see that the doctor's orders were followed, and the rent paid without any name attached to the paying of it. She had liked the widow at once, in the plain, unshowy way she liked very few people, and when Judith came to the door of Peg's cottage that same afternoon, drawn there herself by worry she would not admit to any longer having a right to, the two women met over the sick-bed and fell, almost without meaning to, into speech. "You're the one who sends the coal," Judith said. It was not a question. She had worked it out somewhere in the last 3 sleepless nights, piece by piece, the way she once fitted a torn page back into its binding. "I am the one who carries what's sent," Mrs. Pruitt said. "I don't say by whom. I've been asked not to." "By your employer?" "By His Grace," Mrs. Pruitt said, and did not soften it, because she had decided, watching this woman's face not move at the words, that softening it would be an insult to her. The doctor. The rent on this cottage, paid quiet to the landlord, so no one need know it wasn't earned. The coal. The books, bought for triple what any dealer in the county would have offered, and not one page of them sold on since, though he told you they were bought for another man's shelves. They sit in his library now. Every one. I dust them myself. Judith did not speak for a long moment. Peg's breathing rattled softly in the quiet between them, and somewhere outside a robin called once from the hedge and did not call again. He asked me not to say who sent any of it, Mrs. Pruitt went on. He is like that. He does the good and hides from the thanks, the way another man hides from a debt. I have worked 11 years in that house, and I could count on one hand what he has ever let anyone know he'd done for them, and I would have fingers left over. Why does he hide it? Judith said, very low.
I couldn't say for certain. I have a guess, if you'd like it for nothing. I think he was made a fool of once, by a person who was very good at seeming good, and he has never since trusted the seeming, only the doing, and he has decided the only doing worth trusting is the kind nobody claps for. Mrs. Pruitt folded her hands. I think he came to your market stall meaning to buy some books cheap off a poor widow, and instead he watched you give away the only coin in your pocket to a hungry child in front of no one who mattered. And I think that undid something in him that has stayed undone ever since. That is only an old woman's guess. I am not paid to have opinions. I have them anyway. Judith looked down at her own reddened hands and thought of the letter she had sent. Sir, I believe our arrangement has run its natural course, and felt something in her chest that was not quite shame and not quite grief, closer to the feeling of a door she had shut herself finding, unexpectedly, that it had never actually latched. I sent him away, she said. Then you had better tell him you've changed your mind, Mrs. Pruitt said, not unkindly. Before the fool goes and does something even more foolish, trying not to trouble you. Peg lived. The doctor said so within the week, gruffly, as doctors do when they do not wish to be thanked either, and Tam slept that whole week on a pallet by his mother's bed, with his hand in hers, and Judith sat with them by turns, and it was there, on the 7th evening, with the fire down to embers, and the rain gone soft against the shutters, that the Duke of Renwick came to the door himself, without his gig announced, without a name given to whoever might have asked. He did not come in grand clothes. He came in the same plain wool he had worn to her market stall, as though he understood, without being told, that this was the coat she would trust. I had your letter, he said. I had Mrs. Pruitt's honesty, Judith said. It arrived rather later than yours did, but it said a great deal more. He did not smile. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, uncertain of himself, which she had not thought his face capable of, and she found she did not enjoy seeing it, though she had every right to. My name is Julian Corbett, he said. That part was never false. What I left out of it is that I am also the Duke of Renwick, and have been for 3 years, and I did not tell you at first, because I did not care to be looked at the way that title makes people look at a man. And then I did not tell you, because I had begun to prefer how you looked at me without it. And by the time I understood how much that preference had cost you, I did not know how to undo the lie
without also undoing the only honest thing I had built in years. "That is not quite an apology," Judith said. "No," he agreed. "I find I owe you one first, and I will give it to you plainly, since plain is the only coin you have ever asked me to pay in. I am sorry. I let you believe a smaller thing of me than was true, and I let you carry the shame of that alone in a letter, when I ought to have ridden here the same hour I read it." She sat with that a while. The fire popped once, low, and neither of them moved to feed it. "Why did you come to my stall at all?" she said at last. "The truth of it. Not the collector, not the employer who doesn't care to be known. Because I had heard a schoolmaster's widow was selling his library to eat, and I am ashamed to say I came half expecting to find a woman haggling hard over every volume, the way grief makes some people haggle, as though a fair price could stand in for what was actually lost. I did not come to see the books in the end.
I came to see what a person does with a stranger's coin, and with her own last one, when she believes no one who matters is watching her spend it. That is the only reckoning I have ever trusted since I learned not to trust the other kind. You gave your whole earnings to a hungry child in the middle of a public square and asked nothing of anyone for it, not even the baker's thanks. I have not been able to stop thinking of it since. I would have done it for anyone, she said. I know, he said. That is precisely the trouble. Most people would not. He did not move toward her. He stood by the door with his hat still in his hand, and she understood, watching him hold himself so carefully still, that he was giving her room on purpose, the way a man gives a frightened animal room, not out of fear, but out of respect for what it might choose if left to choose it. I will not ask you for an answer tonight, he said. I did not come for one. I came because I owed you the truth, and a debt owed is a debt owed whether or not the creditor has asked for it. You may take whatever time you need to decide what you think of a duke who lied to you by omission for the better part of 2 months. I will not press you for a word before you are ready to give one, and if the word, when it comes, is no, I will accept it as gladly as I would a yes, because it will at least be honestly your own. That is a very strange kind of courting, Judith said. It is the only kind I trust any more, he said, and for the first time that evening, something almost like a smile moved at the corner of his mouth, unpracticed, there and gone. I have tried the other kind. I did not care for what it made of either party. She walked him to the door herself, which was not required of her, and stood in it a moment after he had gone, watching his shape go small down the dark lane, and did not know then that she had already decided, though it would take her 3 more days to admit it to herself in words. The 3 days passed the way the worst and best of days do, slowly and then all at once. She sat with Peg, who mended further daily, and with Tam, who had begun to laugh again, a real laugh, unguarded, the first sound in that cottage all autumn that had not cost someone something to make. She sat, mostly, with herself, turning the Duke's confession over the way she turned over a page of Thomas's Latin, looking for the seam where the truth of it might come apart under pressure, and found, each time, that it held. On the 4th day she walked the 2 miles to Renwick Hall herself, in her grey shawl, past a gate that any other day would have turned her back without a word from the porter, and asked to see his grace, and was shown in
because Mrs. Pruitt had left instructions weeks before that the widow from Fenwick was to be shown in whenever she came, whatever the hour. He met her in a small parlor off the library, a warm room, low-ceilinged, a fire already lit, though the afternoon was mild, books on every wall, and she saw, before she saw him, that Thomas's whole collection stood shelved along the near wall, exactly as she had catalogued it, the Ovid in its place, the sermons in theirs, nothing sold on, nothing scattered, kept together the way a man keeps a thing he means to honor rather than use. "You kept them together," she said. "I could not bring myself to break up a library a man had built with such care," he said. "It seemed a poor way to repay what his margins taught me about him." She looked at the shelf a long moment, and then at him. "I have thought a great deal about what your housekeeper said to me," she told him. "That you do good and hide from the thanks of it, the way another man hides from a debt. I understand it better now than I did. I do not entirely forgive the omission. I want you to know that plainly, because I think you would rather have the plain truth than a comfortable one." "I would," he said, "always."
"But I have decided," she went on, "that a man who spends 2 months quietly paying a stranger's rent and never once mentions it, who buys a dead schoolmaster's library above its worth and keeps every volume rather than sell a single one, who tells me the truth the very evening he understands he has failed to, unprompted, though I had already sent him away and owed him nothing further, is not, in the end, the same as a man who lies for his own comfort. I think there is a difference. I have decided I would like to go on believing there is." "There is," he said, low. "I would not ask you to trust a man who could not tell the two apart himself." She crossed the small room to him, which she had never done in all their afternoons at her own table, and he did not reach for her, though she watched him want to, his hands very still at his sides, giving her, even now, the room he had promised. "I have terms," she said, and there was the faintest dry humor in it, enough that he heard it, and something eased visibly in his shoulders. "You will not lie to me again, not by omission, not by kindness meant to spare me. You will tell me the plain truth, even when it costs you something to tell it. And whatever I am to you, wife or otherwise, I will be kept whole in it, not managed, not spared decisions on the grounds that I am too poor or too plain or too newly widowed to be trusted with them." "Those are not terms," he said. "Those are simply how I meant to go on, regardless. But I accept them gladly, and I will hold to them, and you may hold me to them for the rest of my life, if I fail." "Thank you," Judith said, "for the books." "Thank you," he said, "for not selling only what you thought I wanted to buy." She laughed then, once, surprised out of herself, the sound rusty from disuse, and it was the first time he had heard it, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he has been waiting a long while to see confirmed. He took her hand then, and drew the glove from it slowly, finger by finger, watching her face the whole time as though asking permission with each one, until her bare hand lay in his, red at the knuckle, ink still faint at 2 fingers, and he bent his head and kissed it, once, gently, the way a man kisses a thing he intends to go on honoring long after the gesture itself is forgotten. "My name," he said, "is Julian. I would have you use it if you are willing. I have not much liked hearing it from anyone in years." "Julian," she said,
testing the shape of it, and found she liked the shape of it very well. Yes, he said. It was the only word she needed in the end. And she gave it to him, not because he was a duke, and not because he had paid a debt no one asked him to pay, but because he had told her the truth without being made to, and had waited, without pressing her, for her to decide what that truth was worth. They were married in the spring, quietly, in the small stone church at Fenwick, rather than the grand one nearer the hall, because Judith asked for it, and Julian, true to his word, did not argue her out of a single wish she named. Lady Corvina was not asked, and did not come, having removed herself some months before to a cousin's house in Bath, after a conversation with the Duke of Runnock, conducted in tones so cold and so brief that the servants who overheard the first 2 sentences of it did not care to stay for the third. She was received at Renwick Hall exactly once more in the years that followed, at a Christmas gathering neither host could decently avoid, and left early, and was not missed. Peg recovered fully by the following summer, and was given work in the hall's own laundry, steady work, paid work, which she took not as charity, but as wages honestly earned, and said so herself, more than once, to anyone who suggested otherwise. Tam was schooled, first at his mother's insistence, and then at his own, in a small, clear hand that within 2 years could copy out a page of Latin nearly as neatly as the schoolmaster who had once owned the book it came from. And he kept, always, a particular fondness for a certain worn copy of Ovid, though he never could say quite why.
A year to the day after the Duke of Renwick had stood in a market square watching a poor widow give away her last coin to a hungry child, he sat with that same woman, now his wife, in the small, warm parlour off the library at Renwick Hall. A fire low in the grate, her bare hand laced in his, where the glove had long since been set aside for good. Outside a rook called once from the wall, and did not call again. The shelves around them held every book that had once stood in a poorer house, and a great many more besides, because neither of them, it turned out, could pass a bookstall without stopping, and neither of them ever sold a single volume again, not for bread, not for anything. It is not what a person says when the room is full that tells you who they are. It is what they do when the room is empty, and they believe no one is keeping the account.